So I think we can go ahead and begin. And I just want to start off with thanking you for attending our public comment meetings to discuss Maricopa County's role in redistricting and reprecincting. Every 10 years after the decennial census, jurisdictions across the country are going through efforts to redraw boundaries, jurisdiction lines, district lines to be able to accommodate a whole variety of different types of voting precincts and voting jurisdictions. And Arizona and Maricopa County is no different. So Maricopa County is actually going right now through a reprecinct effort of voting precincts and justice court precincts that the board will be considering at its Board of Supervisors meeting, special meeting on September 27th. And we are conducting 5 public comment meetings to obtain input from the community about those proposed changes. And this is actually the second public comment meeting that we are hosting. The first was yesterday, where we reviewed potential changes in Board of Supervisor District 2, which is the district that's in North Mesa and runs along Scottsdale and Fountain Hills in the Carefree area. And today we will be discussing proposed changes in Board of Supervisor District 1, which runs in our Southeast Valley from Ahwatukee. It includes portions of Tempe, Mesa, Chandler, Gilbert, and all the way south to the southeast portion up to our canal boundary where we have Queen Creek. So we'll be discussing proposed changes in that area within Board of Supervisor District 2. And we really welcome your public comments and input into those changes, as we'll be discussing the methodologies that we use to make those changes. And we use a lot of data as we make those types of decisions. However, your input as community members is very valuable to us, and we want to consider it as we make and we propose these changes, and as the Board of Supervisors considers these changes as we move forward. These changes do have a statutory deadline of October 1st that they must be approved. So that's why we scheduled the Board of Supervisors meeting for September 27th. So before we get started, I do have a few housekeeping items, and I just want to let everyone know, all the attendees know, that the meeting is being recorded, and we will be posting the meeting on our website at the beginning of next week, and it will be at the Reprecincting.Maricopa.Vote website, which is the website that you use to register for this meeting. All attendees have no video, and they have been muted to accommodate our tight timeline that we need to get through. We have a lot of changes that we need to discuss. And then if you do have a comment or question, we will be answering those throughout the meeting. We'll be responding to comments in the chat feature that Zoom provides. And then also we'll have members of our team that will then be reading some of those questions out loud and those responses, especially for those members that may not be able to attend the actual meeting, but are calling into the meeting. And if you are calling into the meeting, you still can submit comments. You can either use our website, which we will go through how our website functions here shortly, or you can submit an email to voterinfo@risk.maricopa. I'll repeat that, voterinfo@risk.maricopa.gov, and that's VOTERINFO, the symbol at RISC.MARICOPA.gov. And while we won't be able to respond to that question immediately or during the presentation, we will receive an email, and then we'll respond to your question via email. And now I'm going to actually turn it over to Selena Olivias Iglesias. She is our bilingual community outreach coordinator, and she's going to relay that same information to our Spanish-speaking attendees. Selena, are you available?
Hi, I'm here. Primero que nada, quería darles las bienvenidas y las gracias por asistir a las reuniones públicas de redistribución del Condado Maricopa. Después del censo que se realiza cada 10 años, las entidades responsables de evaluar los límites de los distritos deben de comenzar a redistribuir sus esfuerzos a nivel federal, estatal y local. Hoy vamos a discutir el papel que desempeña el condado Maricopa al rediseñar las líneas de los distritos y recintos y vamos a revisar a detalle los cambios de que la Junta de Supervisores va a considerar para los recintos electorales y los recintos del Tribunal de Justicia. A medida que la Junta evalúa estos cambios propuestos, el condado ha establecido estas reuniones públicas y un sitio web público para solicitar aportaciones del público. Las observaciones y aportaciones recibidas en estos foros de comentarios públicos serán considerados a medida que la Junta avanza con los esfuerzos de redistribución de distritos y recintos. El enfoque de la reunión pública de hoy detallará principalmente los cambios propuestos en el recinto electoral y Tribunal de Justicia que está considerando dentro de los límites del Distrito 1 de la Junta de Supervisores. Antes de comenzar, cubriré algunos puntos importantes de logística de la reunión. Esta reunión está siendo grabada y será publicada en línea en la página Redistribución.Maricopa.Vote. Es la misma en donde ustedes se anotaron para asistir a esta reunión pública. Si tiene algún comentario o pregunta, por favor, use la función de chat de Zoom para escribir su comentario o pregunta. Responderemos a sus preguntas y comentarios a lo largo de la presentación. También puede enviar un comentario en línea en redistribución.maricopa.vote o bien puede enviar un correo electrónico a voterinfo@risk.maricopa.gov. Lo repito, voterinfo@risk.maricopa.gov. Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you, Selena. And actually, I think I forgot to describe how you could submit a chat if you're not familiar with responding or using Zoom. So typically, if you hover your mouse over the bottom portion of your screen, a little pop-up will appear, and it will be how you normally would mute or share your video, how you would see the different participants in the meeting. And it has a little bubble feature that has the word chat underneath it. If you select on that, it'll give you the option to then submit a comment or a question. Sometimes the chat button doesn't appear depending on the version of Zoom that you have installed on your computer. So then you could click on the ellipses, those three little dots that has the more underneath it, and select that function, and then that should give you the option then to to select chat and then write a comment or a question. So, well, thank you. And now we'll discuss or move forward with our agenda. So today we will be providing a welcome. So I'll be introducing, we have a couple members from the support precincts of judges, be introducing the judges, and they'll have some opening remarks. Then we'll be going through what Maricopa County's role is in redistricting. We'll be talking briefly about what is reprecincting. We'll go through and describe our website where we are taking public comment and information and how on our website. We'll be going into detail to discuss the Justice Court methodology for their proposed precinct changes. We'll go into detail on the voting precinct methodology changes. And then we have about 31 different exhibits that will be the proposed voting precinct changes that will include some Justice Court precinct changes as well in that will occur within District 1. And then we'll open it up for questions and answers, but please don't wait till the end to submit your questions or answers. If you have questions or comments throughout the meeting, please type them into the chat and then we'll answer them as we proceed. So let's start off with a welcome. So we have two members from the Justice Court precincts here. We have Presiding Judge Anna Huberman. She is the Justice of the Peace in Country Meadows precinct, where she has served since 2012, when the Board of Supervisors created the Country Meadows Justice Court. The Justices of the Peace in Maricopa County elected Judge Huberman to serve as the presiding Justice of the Peace, and her term and leadership began just recently in July 1st. Prior to election to the bench, Judge Huberman served as a court interpreter with the Maricopa County Superior Court for over 15 years. We thank you for your service, Judge. And do you have any opening comments or remarks that you'd like to relay to our attendees?
All right, well, thank you, Scott, for that welcome. And thank you for having this meeting, and thank you for all of those who attended. I would just like to say that the process of looking into changes to our precincts began early this year, and they were led by our then presiding judge and court administrator, Keith Russell and Jim Morrow. With the help of our star staff and court administration, who helped them evaluate the caseloads at each court and map the JPCs by voting precincts, they were able to propose solutions to even out the workload between neighboring courts as much as possible. I would also like to send a special thanks to Recorder Richard's staff, who assisted us every step of the way. Judge Russell and Jim Morrow put a lot of time and effort into this project. They also worked closely with the presiding constable, Mike Branham. And with the help of our operations team, they came up with a plan, made regional presentations of their suggestions, had individual conversations with the judges and constables, and ran and reran the numbers as other suggestions were proposed. By the time I was elected presider, most of the decisions and agreements were already in place. Myself and our new court administrator, Chris Reams, are extremely grateful to all involved for their dedication and hard work on this project. I would also like to acknowledge Judge Lenore Driggs, who is the judge of the Arcadia Biltmore Justice Court and the associate presiding judge, and Judge Sharon Sauls, who is the judge of the Kyrene Justice Court, who are present this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Huberman. And I also want to introduce Judge Keith Russell. He is Justice of the Peace for the East Mesa Precinct, where he has served since 2013. The Justice of the Peace of Maricopa County elected Judge Russell to serve as the presiding Justice of the Peace in 2017 and again in 2019. He completed his term in that leadership position in June. Prior to taking the bench, Judge Russell served as the Maricopa County Assessor, having first been elected in 2004, then re-elected in 2008 and 2012. So with that, Judge Russell, do you have any opening comments or remarks for us? Oh, I think you're muted, Judge Russell. We aren't able to hear you. Let's see. As typical with Zoom, we tested this right before the meeting, and there's always sometimes some technical challenges. If you want to try to, I'm showing you is not muted, but I still can't hear you. So I think Judge Russell is going to log out and log back in, and then we'll see if we can hear him. In the meantime, we'll go ahead and proceed, and then we'll give him an opportunity. He has several slides that he'll be presenting later in the presentation. So with that, the next portion of our presentation will actually be introducing Megan Gilbertson. She's our communications director for the Elections Department. And actually, before we proceed here, I do see Chairman Jack Sellers. He is on, and he is the supervisor for Supervisor District 1, the Board of Supervisor District that we are discussing changes for. So Chairman Sellers, do you have a few comments that you'd like to say before we begin or continue?
No, thank you, Scott. You know, my job this evening is to listen. That's the reason I'm here. I appreciate all the work that you're doing with this, and that it is driven towards complying with the laws and using data to do that. So a lot of hard work goes into this. Tonight, I just want to hear what any of the constituents in my district have to say.
Well, thank you, Chairman Sellers. We appreciate that, and we'll go ahead and proceed with the presentation. And so this portion of the presentation is will actually be conducted by Megan Gilbertson, and she's going to give us a preview of our website, what we've designed to obtain information and comments. And we've posted a lot of information about the reprecincting process on our website. So Megan, are you ready?
Yes, thank you, Scott. Welcome, everyone. This website can be found at Reprecincting.Maricopa.Vote, and it is going to provide the public with all of the information that the board will be considering on voting precincts and justice court precincts. Voters can find the historic maps all the way back to 2006 for justice court, or for both justice court and voting precincts. In addition, voters can also load and view the proposed map that we'll be discussing in more detail tonight. It also provides information about the methodology that was used to make these proposed changes, and provides you a place to provide those public comments for the board and the justice courts to consider as they're making their decisions on these changes. This information is available for voting precincts. If you click on the next tab, you can also find the same information for justice court precincts that are tailored to their changes and to the lines that are drawn in those areas. You can also submit public comments right here specifically for justice court precincts as well. In addition, where you all registered to come to this meeting, this is where we'll have the public meetings. We're going to post, as Scott said, these presentations here in this tab next week, and we'll also be posting the presentation slides themselves. And then lastly, all of this content can be found in both English and Spanish. So we can make sure that all the voters here in Maricopa County have the ability to provide the feedback and comments that the board is looking forward to considering. And with that, Scott, I'll give it back to you.
So, and Megan, I think Judge Russell has logged back in and is saying that he can't unmute himself. So let's go ahead and test that. See if we can unmute the judge.
Muted.
Oh.
There,
Yeah,
can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can. And you did great sign languages. That's the universal Zoom meeting sign language that you need to get off the call and then rejoin. So thank you. And I'll now turn it over to you for a few opening remarks.
Well, and I'll be brief, but thank you, Scott, for the introduction. I also want to express my appreciation to all the people who have participated in this process. There are a lot of moving parts. I need to express appreciation to Chairman Sellers for his cooperation and working with us. I need to express appreciation to Recorder Richard, all his staff who's been involved, the staff at the assessor's office, their constables, and the JPs themselves who have agreed and worked with coming up with the proposals that people will be seeing later on in the presentation. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Judge Russell. And are we still showing the presentation? I'm not showing that up right now.
No.
So I'm gonna go share my screen. Okay, so now everyone should see the slide that we transitioned to show our website. So I'm going to move forward to discussing redistricting in Arizona and Maricopa County's role. And so many of you are probably aware, or you may be aware, of the Independent Redistricting Commission. And that is a commission that's established in the Arizona Constitution, actually Article 4, Part 2, Section 1, that gives them the authority to redraw boundaries, our congressional district boundaries. And those are our U.S. House of Representatives. There are currently 9 in the state of Arizona, and actually 8 of those congressional district boundaries cut through Maricopa County. And those, the Independent Redistricting Commission is also tasked with updating and redrawing legislative district boundaries as well. There are 30 boundaries, 30 jurisdictions within the state of Arizona, and 20 of those then overlap with Maricopa County, or at least currently. Those will be going through review. Normally, the Independent Redistricting Commission is much further along in their analysis of their redistricting efforts. But however, due to COVID-19 and the delay in the Census Bureau providing them the information that they need, as well as other jurisdictions as they go through their redistricting efforts, typically that information, the census releases in January, February, early March of any odd year when redistricting effort occurs, or after that in that 10-year cycle. But this year they didn't release the information needed to redraw those boundaries until late August. So right now their timeline to update the boundaries for those congressional districts and legislative districts is providing it late, at least to us, in late December, early January. And so that does impact the county as it moves forward with its redistricting efforts, because part of the county's role is to actually serve as the glue or the interface between the independent redistricting and other local jurisdictions that have to perform redistricting as well as the board's responsibility for its lines that it has to redraw. And so the Board of Supervisors are responsible for not only redrawing their boundaries. So there's 5 Board of Supervisor districts in Maricopa County. And we're here to talk about District 1. And I mentioned District 2 yesterday that we reviewed. We have a District 3 that runs in the central corridor through Phoenix and up all the way north to Anthem area. It does include portions of Glendale. We have a District 4, which is in our West Valley. It includes large portions of Glendale, the far Northwest Valley, so Surprise, Wickenburg, Aguila, as well as portions of part of the Southwest Valley, which is Avondale, Goodyear area, and portions of Buckeye. And they have Supervisor District 5, which is our current minority majority district, and that includes portions of Phoenix, Glendale, Guadalupe, as well as Avondale, Goodyear, Buckeye, and Tolleson. So, and then the Board of Supervisors also then draws those boundaries for the community college district and the special healthcare districts. Those lines actually track into the exact lines of the Board of Supervisors. So given the challenges and the delay in the census data, our legislature recognized that the board needed extra time, and this isn't unique to Maricopa County, this is all the county boards, that they would need additional time to redraw those board boundaries and to incorporate that information from the Independent Redistricting Commission as well as other districts. So they passed SB 1107 as an emergency bill this last session. And that actually gives the board until July 1st, 2022 to update those Board of Supervisor lines. Otherwise, they would have had to update them by December 1st. They would have gone into effect in January 2nd, 2022. But now those lines that are updated on July 1st, 2022 will then go into effect on January 2nd, 2024, before the next presidential year elections. And then there are other districts that are going through redistricting now as well. There's 6 cities and towns. Those include the cities and towns of Surprise, Glendale, Peoria, let me see if I can remember that, Mesa, Buckeye, and City of Phoenix as well. And then there's 3 schools, the Phoenix Union School District, the EVIT, so East Valley Institute of Technology, and then the West Mex District will also be redrawing their boundaries. So there's a lot of different lines and updates that will be happening throughout this process, and our GIS team will be very busy as we incorporate that information to redraw those boundaries. And then we have to also then meet those the timelines to update our voting precincts and our justice court precincts. So with that and that role, we're going to go ahead and turn it over to the justice court precincts and our Judge Huberman and Judge Russell to talk through the methodology that the justice courts use to identify potential changes to present to the board later this month. So Judge Huberman.
All right, now, Thank you once again. If we can go to the next slide. Okay, so we have 26 justice courts in Maricopa County. 25 are full-time courts and our Ironwood Justice Court, which is part-time. Our judges and administration have been aware for some time now of issues with our current precinct lines that have created an imbalance in the workload among our courts. As you will hear in the recorder's portion this evening, the basis in determining voting precinct lines is population. But for justice court precincts, it's JPCs. So we should start by explaining what judicial productivity credits are. Justice courts hear 7 types of cases. Those different case types generate different amount of work for both the judge and for the staff, depending on many, many different factors. And the case types vary from court to court based on geography and boundaries. Some courts may have more seasonal work because they have lakes or rivers. Some courts have more freeways, which create more criminal traffic cases. Some courts have more apartment complexes, which translates into more evictions. Although there could be different metrics to measure work in the justice courts, the legislature has settled on JPCs. JPCs assign a value to each case type filed in each court. Those values are legislated in statute. We're referring to ARS 22-125. This statute also provides that judicial salaries are determined by the total judicial productivity credits. But what interests us today is subsection H, which establishes that a justice court precinct shall not exceed 1,200 JPCs. If it does, the County Board of Supervisors shall create sufficient courts, meaning they could add a new court or redraw the justice court precinct boundaries. Our proposal today is to redraw the lines. Next slide. As you will see, the workload across the different courts in the county is very imbalanced. We have 2 courts that currently exceed the 1,200 JPCs described in the statute. Although constables are elected in the same precincts as the justice of the peace, the constable workload is not driven by JPCs and may be difficult to measure. Constable work is higher in precincts with high evictions, such as Country Meadows and Manistee. Among other things, constables serve orders of protection on defendants that reside in the constable's precinct, regardless of which judge issued the order. Next slide. Taking into account the total workload in the county, a perfect balance would be 900 JPCs per court. In this graph, the green section shows the courts that are currently between 800 and 1,000 JPCs. As you can see, we currently have 9 courts in the low range of JPCs, 2 of those under 700. 7 courts are in the high range, 2 of those over 1,200. I will now turn it over to Judge Keith Russell.
Thank you, Judge Huberman. On this map, you can see the 5 different Board of Supervisors districts and also the 26 different boundary lines for the justice courts. Each court is colored a little bit differently. If you look at the map, you'll notice that some of our courts have got large geographical areas. Some of them are quite small, but the way that those lines are drawn is based upon those judicial productivity credits that Judge Huberman was just talking about. You'll also notice on this map that there are some dotted lines and there are some colored areas that are brighter. These are the areas that we're talking about having a proposal to modify the boundaries for those courts. As is already mentioned, we're dealing with District 1 today, so we're only going to be talking about the changes in District 1, which is located in the southeast corner of the county. If we could jump back a little bit to, thank you. That second map shows just District 1, and it shows a lot more detail, which is great. But unfortunately, because some of our courts are outside of District 1, but are impacted by the changes that we're talking about that could be part of District 1, this map's just a little bit easier to work with. So we have 9 justice courts that are either located in District 1 or are proposed to be located in District 1. These include the Santan Justice Court, the San Marcos Court, the Highland Court, the Kyrene Court, University Lakes, and then we have got small amounts of Arcadia Biltmore, West Mesa, and North Mesa, and Mcdowell Mountain is proposed to extend down into District 1. So let's start with Mcdowell Mountain, which is the lighter blue area close to where it says District 2, because that's where most of it is. And in its southwest corner, there's a brighter blue or a darker blue area that currently is part of the Arcadia Biltmore Court. It is proposed that this area would be transferred from Arcadia Biltmore into Mcdowell Mountain. Mcdowell Mountain would actually give the area that's directly north with the dotted line and light green back to Arcadia Biltmore to help round out or balance the configuration of the districts. But the area in dark blue has considerably more JPC credits. Mcdowell Mountain is the lowest full-time court that we have as far as JPCs, and this would add approximately 127 JPCs to their workload. If you go down and to the right, you'll notice some dark green areas. There's 2 of them. The lighter green area is known as the Highland Court, and North Mesa is proposed to give the area on the top of the Highland Court, or that dark green area, to Highland, and San Marcos is proposed to give the smaller rectangular dark green area below that to the Highland Court. Highland is our second lowest JPC count court that's a full-time court in the county. This would add just a little over 100 JPCs to the Highland Court to help round that out. Then if you look a little bit farther down and to the right, you'll notice 2 bright red areas. These are areas that are actually currently part of the Highland Court that is proposed would go to the Santan Justice Court. This is only 14 JPCs. This is designed to help manage or conform the boundary lines for these courts, and there's not a substantial impact to any of the court's workloads with that move. If you could go to the next slide. Once again, this is Supervisory District 1. It zooms in. You will notice the double red line denotes the current supervisory district. The different colors denote different justice courts. And if you can see the smaller white lines, those reflect voting precincts as they're currently constituted. Let's go to our next slide, please. So we kind of gave you the solution to the problem that Judge Huberman was talking about, but now we want to talk about the process that we came up with these proposals. So as Judge Huberman indicated, JPCs is how we balance workloads. It's how we measure workloads and then try to balance workloads. The legislature also in statute in ARS 22101A has authorized the Board of Supervisors to form, change, or abolish justice courts, plural, or modify their boundary lines. And that's what we're proposing here. So historically, when courts got out of balance, a new court may have been the appropriate course of action. It's conceivable that reducing a court or abolishing a court might be an appropriate course of action, but with what's proposed in this presentation, only redrawing the lines to help balance the workloads. If we could go to our next slide, please. So to do this and to be able to measure the impact of these changes, we had to come up with a statistical model that would allow us to measure moving a geographical area from one court to another. The pandemic, the last 18 plus months, has impacted the number of things, including the workloads in the courts. Therefore, to try to get pre-pandemic data that we could utilize to make a measurement, we had to go back to calendar year 2019. During the pandemic, particularly evictions and traffic citations have been reduced, but we expect those to return when the pandemic is over. And we also have tried to recognize and account for additional growth, because obviously Maricopa County continues to be one of the fastest growing counties in the nation. But therefore, all of the numbers that you're seeing in this presentation are based on 2019 data, which we expect to be similar to post-pandemic numbers in our courts. If we could go to our next slide, please. So the goal was to minimize the changes and make only those that were most beneficial to the concerns that were already expressed. Therefore, we have tried to adjust only the top 5 high and low courts with their JPC numbers. We have made a few other small adjustments. That one that we talked about in the bright red only accounted for 14 JPCs, but there are other factors that help make that an appropriate move to be being made. If you can go to the next slide, please. Some parameters.
So,
and this is yours, yes. Yes.
Sorry.
No, please, Judge Huberman.
So to achieve these goals, we had to consider certain parameters. We had to draw our lines along voting precinct lines. Voting precincts cannot be split into more than one justice court precinct. The second part of today's presentation deals with changes to voting precinct lines, and some of our lines will change in accordance to the changes being proposed by the Recorder's Office. Most of our courts reside in co-located facilities, so the court building itself cannot be in each individual court's precinct, but it should be in the precinct of one of the courts in that building, preferably centrally located. For the standalone courts, the ones that don't share a building, it was important to make sure the location of the courthouse remained in the precinct, as well as the home of both elected officials, so they aren't drawn out of their precinct. Next slide. Once we identified the courts with the highest and lowest JPCs, we looked at the adjoining precincts where adjustments could be made. The objective was to find an equitable solution for all the courts and elected officials involved to try to get all the courts between 800 and 1,000 JPC. Once again, I must commend Judge Russell and Constable Branham in working with all of the elected officials to come up with a solution that everyone could agree with. I would also like to thank the judges and constables who agreed to add precincts, adding to their caseload to allow the highest JPC courts relief. Next slide. Our statistician was able to break down the JPC data to the voting precinct level. This allowed us to look for the most obvious boundary adjustments between higher and lower JPCs adjoining precincts. We tried to minimize complex adjustments involving more than 2 courts. And if the more obvious or simple adjustments were not viable, we tried to employ common sense in the moves. We were very fortunate to be able to keep the boundary lines adjustments to adjoining precincts in all but one situation. For example, even though our two highest JPC courts, Country Meadows and Manistee, share a boundary, we were able to adjust their boundary lines with other adjoining courts whose JPCs were at the lower end of the spectrum. The one more complicated move was adjusting Mcdowell Mountain upward. We did not have an obvious choice to move from an adjoining precinct. We needed to move some area from the downtown Justice Court to the Arcadia Biltmore Justice Court, so Arcadia Biltmore could then move another area to Mcdowell Mountain. We do need to express our appreciation to the three courts involved with this move. As you can imagine, a three-way move is considerably more complicated than a two-way move. The Downtown Justice Court Precinct is located, just like it sounds, in downtown Phoenix. The Arcadia Biltmore Precinct is located to the north and east of downtown, and the Mcdowell Mountain Precinct is in East Phoenix and runs northeast to the Mcdowell Mountains area. So in a manner of speaking, this three-way move allowed JPCs from downtown to be moved into Mcdowell Mountain. Next slide. Here you can see what the expected balance will look like. As you can see, except for a few exceptions, all courts will fall between the 800 and 1,000 JPC, which was our goal. Ironwood is our part-time court, which is why their JPC numbers are so much lower. After this plan was finalized and agreed to, we realized that some of the changes proposed by the Elections Department to voting precincts would affect some of our numbers. Most of the changes are minimal and shouldn't have a huge impact on any court, but the final numbers might be a little different than what we are seeing on this chart. And with that, if there are no further questions, I will turn it back to Scott Jarrett from the Election Department.
Thank you, Judge Huberman. So Megan, do we have any questions that have been submitted for the Justice Courts?
There are no questions at this time.
Okay, great. So we'll just then continue on. If you do have a question, please, again, submit it in the chat, and then we'll be sure to circle back and answer those questions. So now I'll be covering our key goals and priorities for updating voting precincts. And some of you may be wondering, well, what are voting precincts and why they are important? And essentially, statute establishes voting precincts, 16-411, and the Elections Department uses these precincts, and they're incredibly important to our operations. We use them from everything from our warehouse and logistics and how we guide our teams to ensure that we have the right equipment going out to each voting location. We use the voting precincts to determine sample ballots and how we distribute and send out sample ballots to voters. We also use the voting precincts to help guide how we build the ballot and what contests would be on each ballot. It's the individual districts, the other districts, the legislative districts, the congressional districts, the city and town boundaries that ultimately determine what is on the ballot. But we use the voting precinct to actually identify those specific contests. In our August primary, we had over 15,000 different ballot styles. In our November 2020 general election, we had over 5,000 and close to 10,000 when you count the Spanish ballot that we created. So the precincts are what help ensure that we get the right contest on the right ballot. The political parties also use the precincts for get out the vote efforts. So we provide them throughout the election voter files that show who's voted and which precinct, and then they can then disseminate them to the precinct committeemen, the legislative district chairs, other folks to help them identify people that maybe have received an early ballot and haven't returned that ballot. And then finally, we use the voting precincts to report results. And it's actually the smallest jurisdiction that we do report results. It ends up us having our largest canvas, and the full complete canvas is over 10,000 pages because at least for the November general election, because we have 70 different contests, we report those contests based on precinct. So as we move forward with our reprecincting efforts, we had several goals, and those were to adjust precinct boundaries to accommodate the very large amount of population growth that is occurring in Maricopa County. So we are and have been one of the fastest growing counties in the nation. In Arizona, we had over 760,000 new residents, or our population grew by that many citizens. And then we also then had in Maricopa County alone, we made up 603% of those. So that was over 80% of the total growth in the state of Arizona occurred in Maricopa County. So we wanted to make changes that would help support our in-person voting options. So it would identify and provide smooth voting options. We wanted to identify any voting precincts that based on the last update that occurred in 2018, when we had a voting precinct that may have been cutting through a home, a building, an apartment complex that didn't exist in 2018, but due to the growth, it now existed and we need to update that precinct. And then we wanted to align voting precincts with any newly drawn justice court precincts. So for a look at the numbers related to voting precincts, we last updated them in 2018. Prior to that, we had an update in 2012. You can see those maps on our website. Right now, we are considering and recommending to the board that they consider 133 total changes countywide. So that would include 73 changes that are for precincts that have over 5,000 voters. We really identify that number as the high number that we want to have in any voting precinct. It's really how we target, as I mentioned, sending out sample ballots, identifying voting locations, and 5,000 has been the right mix for a long time for us and has worked very, very well. And given the growth, we have some voting precincts that are now exceeding 10,000 voters, and we'll actually go through several of those voting precincts today. We also had 16 voting precincts that were cutting through a home, but this results in 32 different changes. So anytime you have a voting precinct that is cutting through a home or a building, you have to move the line, and that will then ultimately change the boundaries for two separate precincts. And then also there's 40 different changes to align voting precincts with justice courts. Now these totals actually total 145, not 133. And that is because there's 12 of these changes included a combination of factors, and we included those in the 3 categories above. So in 2018, we had 748 voting precincts. And with these recommended changes, we'll be adding 86, which would bring us to a total of 834 total precincts. And I mentioned this before, but the board will approve these or consider approving these on September 27th, and then they would go into effect January 2nd, 2022. So now we will be discussing some individual or examples of the different methodologies or the items that drove our decision making. And here we have exhibits, and we'll be going through 31 of these for District 1. Here's an example of exhibit. And what you see here is on the left-hand side of the screen, there's an image that shows the current voting precincts that were approved in 2018 or implemented in 2018. And then we have a draft precincts on the right-hand side of the image. So as you can see here, and this is actually a representation from a couple voting precincts in District 1. They're in South Chandler, and they're Adora and Brooks Farm. So Adora and Brooks Farm, currently the Adora precinct has, and if you recall, we want to keep these under 5,000 voters. So Brooks Farm currently has nearly 7,000 voters, 6,928, and Adora has over 8,000 current voters, which is 8,082. So if you can see those in red, and then what we're recommending to the board is actually to split these precincts and create 2 brand new precincts. The Weinberg precinct and the Constellation precinct. So the Weinberg's there at the top of the image on the right, and the Constellation precincts at the bottom of the image on the right. And so what this would do is create, Weinberg would then have 4,470 voters. Constellation would have 4,425. Brooks Farm would have 3,537. And Adora would have 2,722 voters. Another factor that we used in making these decisions, and it's not specific to just the number of voters, we take into account current major roads to try to draw precinct lines along. That helps us and prevents us from potentially cutting through homes in the future. We look at canals, we look at mountains, other types of geographic features that would split a precinct. And then we also look for future growth. Does a precinct have a lot of room to grow and add new residents, or is that precinct already fully built out? So the next factor that we considered was when a precinct was cutting through buildings or homes or apartment complex. And this is a good example. This is actually in District 2. And you can see here on the left, there's that little red circle in the image, and it is the voting precinct is actually dropping just below, and this is McKellips Road. And because it drops below and doesn't follow McKellips Road, it cuts through several homes in that area. And so the change here that we're recommending is to actually bump up that voting precinct to follow the McKellips Road, and that would then address and remove the precinct from cutting through those homes. And then the last example is to accommodate and align voting precincts with the Justice Court precinct changes. And here's an example of a Justice Court precinct change that's occurring in District 4, the Far West Valley, and it's the Ironwood Justice Court and the White Tank Justice Court. And Judge Uberman and Judge Russell discussed actually some of the needs for why this needed to change. And what this change is happening is you can see in the image on the left, that line is about 2 miles further west than in the image on the right. So we've moved that line between Ironwood Justice Court and White Tank Justice Court 2 miles further to the east. And what that does is that actually takes Ironwood Precinct, and Judge Huberman addressed that this is our part-time Justice Court, so they're not a full-time, and increases their judicial productivity credits from 261 to 320. And then that allows, or part of these changes allow then the White Tank to drop fewer than 1,000, to below 1,000 judicial productivity credits. It was at over 1,085. Now it falls below to 9,054. So with that, we're going to go ahead and begin to go through the actual exhibits and the changes that we'll be recommending to the board for voting precincts in District 1. And I'm going to invite Gary Bellotta, our Director of GIS, or Geographical Information Systems, to join me as we go through some of these changes in detail. I'm going to—
Peter Scott.
Hi, Gary, and let me pull up the exhibits. So Gary, can you see the exhibit? Let's see. To start, and we actually covered this one already for the Adora voting precinct. But can you see that, Gary?
I can, yes.
Okay.
If you're able to zoom in a little bit, I think that would help the people online.
How's that look?
That's much better.
Okay, so as we discussed in the example precinct that we went through on the PowerPoint slide, this focuses on the Adora precinct, and we are recommending that we change Adora and split that actually between 4 different precincts. So it's creating the Weinberg and Constellation precincts, and that would end up reducing the total number of voters in Adora, which are currently over 8,000, and Adora would now have 2,722 voters in that precinct, and it would be surrounded by the boundaries or the roads of Chandler Heights and Riggs Road to the north and south, and then Higley Road and Val Vista to the east and west. So any other comments that you'd want to discuss on this, Gary?
There's one other one, and it's Brooks Farm and Adora, they're kind of hand in hand in these changes. So this is really kind of addressing the Brooks Farm side, but along Bell Vista, south of Ocotillo, there's a small subdivision there. I don't know if you can see that. If you go west and right, go another just inch west, up the other way, right there. That is actually the town of Gilbert, and it's a brand new subdivision. So, we talked about trying to align voting precincts to major roads and things like that. We also try to align the voting precincts to jurisdictions. And so, since the rest of Brooks Farm was already in the town of Gilbert, we wanted to make sure that that also was in the town of Gilbert rather than in the city of Chandler, which the voting precinct to the west of there is in Chandler, the rest of it. So I did want to mention that.
That's a good point, Gary. And so the different jurisdictions will each host their own elections that the county actually administers for them. And they have their own canvases. And this is something that resolves voter confusion when you have voting precincts that do end up splitting between cities. Definitely the city clerks and town clerks prefer that we try to avoid that when we're preparing their canvases for them. So the next change is for the Applebee Precinct, and we're actually recommending a name change here for Applebee because Applebee Road no longer will go through this precinct. And if you can see right here, the little handprint, this is Applebee Road. And when we're changing these or recommending the changes here, this is all due to totals for voter growth. Applebee is currently above 5,000 voters, 6,664. And we're recommending that there be 2 new precincts made. This would be Azalea and Cobblestone. So if you look here on the image on the right, you have Azalea and Cobblestone. And with Applebee Road no longer going through Azalea, it didn't make sense to keep this name. So we've recommended Azalea. And what will happen here is with Azalea, we'll have 3,279 voters and Cobblestone 3,291, splitting these precincts along these boundaries. Any other changes here, Gary, that you'd like to discuss?
And just to add on to that little piece that we took from this into Brooks Farm is also represented in Applebee and is now put into Brooks Farm, the one we just had talked about in the previous exhibit.
And the next exhibit actually is Brooks Farm. So it's very similar to the Adora precinct. So there's exponential growth going on in this part of the valley. And Brooks Farm currently has 6,928 total voters. And then we're able to split this precinct up again or between Constellation by adding the Constellation precinct and the Weinberg precinct. And then with those splits, that allows Brooks Farm to drop to 3,537 total voters. Weinberg would be 4,470. Constellation would be 4,425 total voters. Any other changes here, Gary, that you think we should review?
I think we're set on that one. Thank you, Scott.
So the next voting precinct that we're recommending changes, and this is the Camelot voting precinct. And Camelot is in Ahwatukee. It's by Chandler Boulevard and Desert Foothills. And this is related to some changes due to it cutting through homes. And if you can see here, and this is actually one of when the Board of Supervisors are I think is this the South Mountain Park precinct, Gary, when in 2012, we had drawn precincts and then the Independent Redistricting Commission came through and redrew some of the congressional district boundaries. And the few voters were actually moved out of that precinct. So we're actually making that adjustment right now to include those voters in Camelot. Is that correct?
That is completely accurate, Scott. Yeah, in 2012, when the IRC drew their congressional legislative districts, they drew it along the south boundary of the South Mountain Park area, and they orphaned off a few homes in a couple different areas into South Mountain Park. And so those small voting precincts were created. So even though they're in a different congressional district, they were able to be included into the Board of Supervisor district on the south end of the park, as well as the Justice Precinct on the south piece of the park there.
And I believe just there's only homes. So if you look on the image on the left, that little notch that comes out, those are where the homes are. And then the image on the right, this area over here is actually South Mountain Park, right? So very few, there's no homes over in that part of the.
That's correct, Scott. I think there's maybe 4 to 5 homes in that little notch area. And that's the entirety of the homes in the SMP 1 voting precinct.
Which we will get to and cover that in a future exhibit. So the next precinct that we're recommending changes for, and this is the Compadre Precinct as well. And this is also related to voting precincts that are cutting through homes. And Gary, I know that this is really small, but any suggestions on how we interpret this data?
Yeah, so the previous voting precinct lines were just cutting through the backsides of, I think these are actually apartment buildings. It's not actually affecting any voters by doing this change, but it's more just solidifying that those boundaries should be not going through homes and instead along the edge of some parcels in that area.
This change is in South Chandler along Queen Creek Road and the old Pima Road. So right there, actually where the loop 101 comes south, if you just extended that, that's where this change would be. So the next exhibit will cover our recommended changes for Crossroads Park. And on the left, and this is all related to voter totals and population growth. This area is in South Crossroads is Gilbert area, and the crossroads are closest are Higley in the Loop 202. And for Crossroads Park, currently it has 6,293 voters. And what we're recommending is we actually split this into 2 different precincts, adding the Agritopia precinct. And that's based off the name here, Agritopia Loop. And what that would do for the Crossroads is to take that from 6,293 to 3,176 total voters. And then Agritopia would be 3,127. So, and really the precinct for Agritopia just follows that Loop 202 around, and then the Crossroads would be north of Loop 202. Anything else, Gary?
I know that's a perfect explanation, Scott. I did want to throw out on the Crossroads Park on the north side there, there's also some room for growth. I kind of mentioned that earlier. As we do some of these things, some of these changes, we artificially make the voter totals a little lower. So as new subdivisions go in, it doesn't go over the 5,000 threshold that quickly.
So the next exhibit will be discussing Dobson Park, and this is related to cutting through homes, and this is very similar to a prior exhibit we reviewed, and them cutting through the Compadre precinct and those apartment complexes. So and did you say no voters were impacted by this, Gary? Or just
that's correct, Scott. No voters impacted, just ensuring that those lines were very clearly away from those apartment complexes.
So the next exhibit will be for the Folly voting precinct. And this is in Chandler and following Loop 101 and the 202, basically where they meet. So you can see that here. And this is related all to population growth and voter totals. So the Folly precinct currently is at almost 7,000 total voters, 6,985. We're recommending that we create a new voting precinct that is on the east side of the Loop 101, the Bracken precinct. And so what that would then take the Folly precinct to 2,411 total voters, and Bracken to 4,597. Anything else here, Gary?
I think you covered that one, Scott, very well.
Okay, so the next precinct is the Foothills Precinct, and this is in the Ahwatukee area, basically Pecos Road and 27th Avenue. And this is related to growth within this area and the SMP. So this is the South Mountain change that we discussed earlier, and the orphaned homes that were created by the congressional district lines that were drawn in 2012, trying to address that. So the Foothills currently was just over 5,000 voters, 5,423, by creating the Thunder Hill Precinct. So if you look here on the image on the right, it's actually on the east portion of that precinct. And so what we would then move from the Foothills Precinct to be 1,542 total voters. I think that's really to accommodate a lot of potential future growth in this area. And then Thunder Hill Precinct would then be 3,898 total voters. Anything else, Gary?
You covered that one really well. There's definitely, even with the 202 going through there, a lot of growth going in on the west side in that Foothills area.
So the next exhibit is the Fulton Ranch Voting Precinct. This is also, again, to review or to accommodate exponential growth in the valley and the increase in the number of voters. So in Fulton Ranch, this is in South Chandler along Arizona Avenue in Ocotillo. And this is actually one of the precincts that we have some of the larger amount of growth is. We have over 8,000 total voters currently, 8,076. And we're recommending taking the Fulton Ranch precinct and splitting it right there along Arizona Avenue and creating a new precinct, Horseshoe Precinct. And that would then allow Fulton Ranch to drop to 4,099 total voters. And then, Fulton Ranch to drop to 4,099 total voters, and Horseshoe would then be 3,996. Anything else here, Gary?
That was perfect explanation, Scott.
So the next exhibit is for Galveston. Again, this is related to population growth and trying to keep those voters under 5,000. So Galveston is in Chandler, and it's along Loop 101 and the 202 are where they meet. And currently the Galveston precinct has 6,786 total voters, and recommending creating a new precinct, the Windmill Precinct, which will then cover the north end of that precinct above Ray Road. And the Windmill Precinct would then be 2,201 voters. And then that would allow Galveston to be reduced to 4,577 total voters. Anything else there, Gary?
I did want to mention, as we're building these voting precincts, with the Windmill Precinct only having, 2,000 or so voters in it, sometimes building voting precincts is not cut and dry, where you can create a nice, 4,500 voter a precinct. Galveston was reduced down to a very good number, just under 5,000, but just due to other factors, drawing all of them exactly at 5,000 is really, really difficult. When there's different roads that are not straight, there's other boundaries to contend with, and so, but with the Windmill one still being created, I still think it's important to reduce it, that total Galveston to, it was approaching 7,000, so to below. That 5,000 mark.
And then following that major thoroughfare of Ray Road seemed to make the most sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so the next voting precinct is Germaine Precinct. And this again is to accommodate population growth and the number of voters. So for the Germaine Precinct, we're actually recommending, and Germaine is actually in Chandler. It's south of the Loop 202 by Arizona Avenue. So here's the Loop 202, and then we have Arizona Avenue coming through here. So the Germaine Precinct had just over 5,136 voters, and with creating a new precinct, the Aviation Precinct. So if you look here, we have Germaine and then Aviation, and here's a lot of room for potential growth here in aviation. So this would then take the Germaine Precinct from 3,153, or from 5,136 to 3,153 total voters. And the aviation would then be also then just over 3,000 voters. So anything else there, Gary?
I did want to mention in the aviation precinct, there's the Chandler Airport, the local Chandler Airport there, but along Germaine Road, which cuts right through the aviation precinct, there's, like you said, there's quite a bit of growth. There's many apartment complexes being built in that corridor there. And so, even though the 5,100 is pretty, or however many there was initially in Germaine, cutting those 2.5 for future growth was really important there.
So the next exhibit will cover Gilbert Gardens, and this is also to accommodate population growth and the number of voters. So this is in Gilbert, and the closest crossroads are Power Road and Loop 202. And here we're taking Gilbert Gardens and recommending adding a new precinct, Franklin Precinct, which is the bottom half of the current precinct, south of Ray Road. And Gilbert Gardens currently has 5,574 total voters. What this would allow is, with Franklin, the addition of Franklin, Gilbert Gardens would go to 2,437, which there's lots of room and potential for growth there in Gilbert Gardens. And then Franklin then would be 3,152. Anything else there, Gary?
You covered it real well. That was perfect.
So the next exhibit would be for the Higley voting precinct. And so Higley is also in Gilbert, and its closest crossroads are Williamsfield and Higley. And for Higley, we're recommending that we actually create 2 new precincts, Fairview and Blue Jay Precinct. So here we have Higley here in the middle, and then Fairview to the west of Higley, and then Blue Jay to the east of Higley. What that would allow Higley to go from 6,926 total voters to 3,433. And then Fairview would have 2,540 voters, and Blue Jay would have 978. Anything there you want to discuss, Gary?
The Blue Jay precinct, the 900 and so voters that are in there are only partial in that new subdivision. That new subdivision is under construction. All the streets are there, but those the homes are still being built, and so eventually that will be built out with quite a few more voters in that precinct.
So the next precinct is Ivanhoe, and very consistent theme here. The District 1 in the Southeast Valley is one of the actually areas that has the most growth occurring in our county, in South Gilbert, South Chandler, and Queen Creek area. So, and Ivanhoe is in Gilbert, and its closest cross streets are Wrecker Road and Williamsfield Road. And what we're recommending is adding a new precinct, splitting Ivanhoe along Higley Road to create the Milky Way precinct. And what that would do is take Ivanhoe from 8,083 total voters to 4,779. And then Milky Way then would have 3,335 total voters. So anything else there, Gary?
I think we're good on that one. Yeah, that's perfect.
Oh, skipped one. So here we have the Lakewood voting precinct. And this is to accommodate also, again, increases in population growth and the number of voters. So Lakewood precinct is in Ahwatukee. Its closest cross streets are 40th Street and Pecos Road. There along, and also the Loop 202 as it crosses through south of South Mountain. So Lakewood currently has 4,469 total voters. We're recommending we split Lakewood and realign the Wildwood precinct, along that 32nd Street. And so what that would do is take Wildwood to have 2,518 voters, and then Lakewood would have 4,465 total voters. And I believe this is probably to accommodate, future growth as well.
There's some future growth there. Also, just to add on there, there's a voting precinct to the east of Lakewood, Windermere, which we'll be covering later, that has quite a I don't recall the number of voters, but it has definitely more than the 5,000 threshold. And so we're shifting some of the Windermere voters into Lakewood. And then we're taking part of Lakewood and creating a new precinct, Wildwood, out of that.
And we'll get to Windermere, but there's 7,433. So that does allow them to drop to 4,959.
Yes.
Thanks, Gary. So the next exhibit is covering Lantana Canyon voting precinct. And this is in the Chandler area, and Queen Creek and Mcqueen are the closest crossroads here. And this is also to accommodate increased voter registration totals. So currently Lantana Canyon is 6,300 total voters, and we're recommending that we create Indigo precinct. So Indigo is here on the east side of Lantana Canyon. And what that would allow us to do is take Lantana Canyon from that 6,300 to 2,726 total voters, and then Indigo would be 3,584 total voters. And looks like there is potential for a lot of growth there in Lantana Canyon. Is that correct, Gary?
Yes, definitely.
So the next exhibit is the Mcqueen voting precinct. So Mcqueen is in Chandler. Along closest roads are Riggs and Gilbert. And this is another precinct that has a large amount of population growth. Queen is currently at 8,163 total voters. And what we're recommending is take Mcqueen, and then on the west side of the precinct is create a new precinct, Peachtree. And that would then allow Mcqueen to drop from that over 8,000 total voters to 4,027. Peachtree would then have 4,140 total voters. Anything else there, Gary?
Perfect description there, Scott.
So the next precinct is Megan Precinct, and not named after our communications director, Megan Gilbertson. So the Megan Precinct is also related to population growth and voter totals. And it is located in Gilbert. Its closest cross streets are Val Vista and Ray Road. And we're recommending that we take the Megan Precinct and create a new precinct, Ashland Ranch, that follows that Val Vista Road. And that takes Megan from 7,466 total voters down to 2,996. Then Ashland would be 4,499 total voters. Anything else there, Gary?
Perfect description there, Scott. That's exactly what's happening.
So the next exhibit covers the Musket voting precinct. And then again, a familiar theme here. It's related to population growth and the total number of voters. So Musket is in Chandler. It's along Arizona Avenue in the Loop 202, or where it crosses, or real close to the Loop 202. And what we're recommending is to create a new precinct here as well. So taking Musket and having it be Gardner Precinct. And what that would do is take Musket Precinct from 6,987 total voters down to 3,976. And then Gardner Precinct would be 3,029 total voters. And Gary, where exactly, I think we've left off Musket here on the new map.
Musket's up on the top right now. It crosses over Germaine Road. So yeah, so Musket's ends up on the top right there, and then Gardner is on the bottom left.
So it did follow this line along here, and now it's just this small little.
And
area.
and on the west side of Alma School. So we split it right down Germaine Road right in half.
Okay.
So
Thanks.
Gardner's to the south and then Musket's to the north when we split Musket in half.
So the next exhibit is for Pinto voting precinct. And this is because it is cutting through homes. And this is one of those similar situations as we discussed before, where when the Independent Redistricting Commission in 2012 drew the congressional district lines, they orphaned off some homes. And so we're resolving that issue with redrawing the Pinto precinct to include those homes now in that voting block. So if you can see, we have this SMP3 precinct, which actually we'll cover here shortly. And we're just expanding that boundary and moving those homes into Pinto. How many homes are affected there, Gary?
I believe in this instance, there's about 10 or 15 homes. And I did want to mention one other thing. In 2012, when the IRC created those congressional legislative districts, in the South Mountain Park, there really were no census blocks for them to follow. And so that's why they took that route, is along the south of this South Mountain Park, the south end of it. But we did work with the Census Bureau over the last couple of years to create new census block boundaries in the park. And so hopefully in this round of redistricting, the IRC will choose those census block boundaries rather than the ones on the south end. So just to give them more opportunities, so this wouldn't happen in the future.
Can you describe real quick what is a census block and how does independent redistricting use that data?
So the census block is like the smallest geography that the Census Bureau creates. And so when all of the redistricting data was released in mid-August, mid to late August, everything was down. There's other levels of geography, but the smallest one was a census block. And so when the IRC draws their boundaries, they will follow census blocks to balance their populations. In 2012, there was only so many census blocks they could take in this area, so they took those ones. They will not split a census block in half, and census blocks are quite small. They're like, if you think about just a block on a residential street, a lot of times that's a census block. But the IRC won't take a census block and cut it in half because that's how they summarize their population numbers, for when they create their congressional and legislative district boundaries. And the congressional district boundaries, there's 9 of them in the state of Arizona, and the total population between them can have no more than 1 person difference. And so it's very exact in the way they're drawing those boundaries.
So thanks, Gary. Very detailed, a lot of information and data. So I'm glad we took care of and adjusted those census blocks. So this won't happen again. So the next change is for the Queen Creek voting precinct, and the Queen Creek is actually in Queen Creek, and it's on Ellsworth and Riggs Road, so in the far southeast portion of the valley. And this is also due to population growth. So what we're recommending is to create and split Queen Creek between Harvest Precinct, which is at the south end of the Queen Creek voting precinct. And so that would then take Queen Creek from 5,511 total voters to 2,958. Then Harvest would then now be 2,588. And this is just one area that is experiencing large amounts of growth, and will accommodate future growth. Anything else here, Gary?
I think you described that one perfectly. There's definitely some room for growth out there, and it is a fast-growing area.
So the next precinct change is for Rittenhouse, and it's actually a very similar map. It shows Queen Creek in it, and Rittenhouse is just north of that Queen Creek voting precinct, this triangle here. And this is, I think, is maybe one of the highest populated precincts, and it's currently at over 10,885 total voters. And what we're recommending is to split this, actually create 2 more precincts. We have Rittenhouse, which would be on the east side of that, and then creating Russet, or on the west side of the current precinct, creating Russet, which would be on the east side, and Silver Creek, which would be on the east and south portion of that triangle. And that would take Rittenhouse from at over 10,000 total voters to 4,981. Silver Creek would be 3,851, and then Russet would be 2,129. And there's still room for growth in all of these voting precincts.
Yes, definitely still room for growth out there.
It's scary. Then now on to Rock Ledge voting precinct. And this is similar to what we had described with those other precincts that were all up against and aligned with South Mountain Park. And this is related to the census blocks and the the Independent Redistricting Commission redrawing those lines and then orphaning off some houses just here in this little notch right here. So we're recommending that we take that SMP2, South Mountain Precinct number 2, and incorporate that into Rockledge Precinct. And that really it's not changing the total number of voters by very much. How many houses are there, Gary?
I believe there's only 3 homes there.
So on to the next exhibit, and this is the South Mountain Precinct number 1, which we already covered when we were reviewing Camelot, and just removing that boundary that orphaned off those homes that were in South Mountain 1, moving them into Camelot Precinct. Go to South Mountain Precinct number 2, which is what we just covered when we were reviewing Rockledge, and removing those precincts that were orphaned off by this little notch here, and moving them into that Rockledge Precinct. And then South Mountain Precinct number 3, something we already covered when we were reviewing Pinto Precinct, and removing that boundary here, and then incorporating those homes into Pinto. So those are South Mountain precincts. Now we're going on to, you know how we pronounce this precinct, Gary?
Sunoki.
Sunoki Precinct. Here, and it's also for the total, our population totals, or the number of registered voters. Sunoki is in, let's see if I have here. Yep, so it's Ocotillo and Sossaman are the closest thoroughfares or roads and cross sections for this precinct. And this is to accommodate increased population growth. It's currently at 6,040 voters. And we're actually then redrawing this boundary right along here, I think, and taking Sossaman out a little bit more, reducing the number of voters. This takes it to 4,872 total voters. And is there any other changes here, Gary, that I'm not seeing?
You have it, just about everything there was pretty accurate. There's kind of a 3-way combination switch here, where we did take a little bit of Sunoki, and then we also took a little bit of Sossaman and put it together. But then we created a new voting precinct, Cortina, there. And in Sunoki, there is some room for growth, and kind of depends on how things grow, but there's also larger lots in that area where there's like horse property and that kind of thing. So that's why, even though we're still around the 5,000 voter range, we left that kind of sit to kind of see if anything else changes out there because of those larger lots where there is a little bit of growth potential, but not a ton. And then it looks like, just to the north there, we created the Cortina precinct and adjusted the Sossaman precinct a bit.
So in the Sossaman precinct, it was at 8,458 total voters. So it is reducing that to 4,809. And then the Cortina precinct would be 4,833. So we're able to bring all of these precincts now under the 5,000. I believe actually Sossaman is our next exhibit. We can look at it. This is just another view, a more zoomed in view of the splitting of Cortina, or the creation of Cortina, there to the west portion of Sossaman. Anything else with this view?
I think we got that one all set there.
So the next precinct is the Trilogy voting precinct, and this is also due to population growth. So with the Trilogy precinct, it is at Queen Creek and Higley, the closest crossroads, and it's approaching 10,000 total voters. It's at 9,677, and it follows, here's Higley, Ocotillo Road, Power Road, and then going up to Germaine Road, and we're recommending splitting that and along that Queen Creek Road here, and that would bring Trilogy to under 4,521 voters, and then would have Joshua Tree, which is down here below. And is Joshua Tree already a precinct, or are we creating a new one?
We're creating that one brand new.
That brand new. And actually, I don't have the totals for Joshua Tree written down. Maybe we can look those up, circle back. And we're actually at our last exhibit, Windermere. So why Gary gets the Joshua Tree numbers, we'll cover our last exhibit. So Windermere is also due to increased voter population. This is in Ahwatukee, and it's right where I-10 and the Loop 202 meet. There in the east portion of Ahwatukee, and this is due to voter totals as well. Windermere is currently 7,430 total voters, and by drawing the line along 40th Street, so just moving on the prior west boundary of the precinct to align with that 40th Street, and then allows some of those voters to go into Lakewood, which we discussed earlier, and that brings in Windermere down to 4,959 total voters.
Right, and Scott, and yeah, I do have a number for that. The Joshua Tree is at 5,157 total voters. It's a little bit over the 5,000 mark, but you know, as we kind of talked about a little bit ago, drawing a perfect voting precinct every time with a perfect number of voters, you know, sometimes it's just not feasible. And so right now it's at 5,157. I think on the southwest corner, you know, eventually that may grow more, but nothing's platted for a new subdivision there. So, you know, in future iterations, it may adjust a bit more.
Thank you, Gary. These there's a lot of different information and data sets that we use to make some of these changes, and we do welcome any input or feedback. Megan, do we have any questions or comments?
Hi, Scott. We did have a few comments. Someone was asking about the Pepperwood precinct and if there would be any changes, and there are no proposed changes to that voting precinct. And additionally, there's 3,776 voters within that precinct. We also had another comment about wanting more road names on the maps for references, and we provided them the countywide map where they could zoom into the areas that they were most interested in to find those points of reference to see where those changes would exactly be made. And that's all, Scott.
Thanks, Megan. And currently, these exhibits that we just reviewed today are not on the website. We will be posting them on the website, so they will also be available as a resource for you as you go through and you review any of these proposed changes, and then provide us input or feedback through our website or by emailing us at voterinfo.risk. So I think we can close it out. We've gone over our proposed time by about 3 minutes. Before we do that, I want to turn it over to Judge Huberman or Judge Russell and see if they have any closing remarks that they want to make.
Thank you, Scott. Let me just say thank you to everybody who has been on this meeting. The virtual meetings like this present some opportunities. They also are a little bit challenging. I made a comment in yesterday's meeting about how good the maps are on the recorder's website. Let me encourage people who want to see more detail to go there. I do that frequently myself and really appreciate the number of maps and the level of detail that they provide. Thank you for being part of this presentation.
Thank you, Judge Russell. Judge Huberman?
Oh, I'll just echo what Judge Russell said. Thank you, everyone, for coming, and anything that anyone needs from us, we're here to help. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge Huberman. Chairman Sellers, any closing remarks?
I just want to thank everyone, you know, the judges, the constables, all the folks in your office, Scott. Really, I think people gain a lot of appreciation for how much work goes into this, and some pretty impressive results. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Chairman. And I just want to remind everyone that our public-facing website is available, Reprecincting.Maricopa.Vote. And you can submit any public comments through that website. We will be incorporating those as we move forward. And then the Board of Supervisors will be considering these changes to the Justice Court precincts as well as the voting precincts at a special meeting on September 27th, later this month. So thank you for your time. And we look forward to hearing from you or any public comments or suggestions that you may have for us.